John Phillips, welcome you to the broadcast today with 24/7 World Radio. It's a podcast that we do on a regular basis. And this is the 4th of June, 2024. That's June 4th, 2024. And some very remarkable dates are coming up in June. So, welcome you to the broadcast. I'm with my dear brother in Christ, George Widger. And so I'm welcoming him today as the illustrious, erudite investigator that he is. And he makes some of these investigators of the past look sick. Like, who was that famous investigator in England? What was that guy? Smoked a pipe. Who was that guy, George?
Sherlock Holmes? Sherlock
Holmes, that's right. You're better than Sherlock Holmes, George. So I just want you to know that.
Well, his career, okay, I'll respond to that after I get done with my scripture verse, because that should take precedence.
Okay. All right. Well, Brother George, welcome to the broadcast today.
Okay. Well, thank you. So my scripture verse is Romans 5, verse 12. Romans 5, verse 12, which says, well, I'll start in verse 11. So Romans 5, verses 11 and 12. And not only so, but we also join God through our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom we have received atonement. Verse 12, wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, so death passed on to all men, for all that have sinned. Okay, I'll repeat verse 12. Wherefore, or therefore, as we say now, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed on to all men, for that all men have sinned. Okay, so in other words, this particular passage affects pretty much all of your ologies, your anthropology, your study of man, your biology, your study of life, your thanatology, your study of death, your soteriology, your study of salvation. And I know this might seem like a fairly straightforward passage to most of your listeners. However, it's been my experience, the more educated people have, the more education people have, i.e. the more schooling and indoctrination they have, the more difficult this passage is for them.
Well, yeah, you see, they've been taught to hate God. They've been taught to hate the Bible. They've been taught that anybody who believes the Bible has got to be some stupid Southern country bumpkin. And so they've been brainwashed against us, and it's pitiful because they have no answers. And I was one of them. I used to be just like that. And of course, that passage teaches seminal headship, that we were in the semen of Adam when he sinned. And then, since all have sinned, that's why the virgin birth of the Messiah, Lord Jesus, is so important, because he had to be born outside of that Adamic sin curse. So, amen, George.
Well, okay. Well, I'm not talking about hardcore secular atheists, people who teach evolution, things like that. I'm talking about professed Christians, including those of the cloth, your so-called clergy. You don't know how many... And I'm not being facetious when I say that. It's just like, you don't know how many people I know who've been to seminary, who call themselves pastors. They have all these letters behind their names. They have more letters than, say, a crossword book, MD, or well, I'm MDiv,
Thud, FUD, and all that stuff.
And so
PhD, Thud, FUD, and all that. Yeah.
Okay, so, and it doesn't matter what the denomination is, whether you're talking Baptist, Presbyterian, Lutheran, whatever. And it almost doesn't matter where they go. They say, well,
yeah, because they're all the universities are accredited. They're accredited by Satan's state. And so, as I've always mentioned before, Zygmunt Dobbs wrote the classic work on the first years of being in college, university. It's called The Great Deceit, The Pseudosocial Sciences by Zygmunt Dobbs, D-O-B-B-S. It's a classic work. Shows you that it's all communism, socialism, atheism, and you name it. Go ahead, George.
Okay, so if I were in a church, I was looking for a pastor. So one of the rules I would have, one of the sine qua nons I would have, is if he's been to seminary. No, thank you. I'm not. No, thank you. If he's been to seminary, I'm not interested.
That's right. That's right, because they're generally dead as a hammer. It's all theology and arid scholasticism, and not a heartbeat of compassion or sympathy. Yeah.
Okay. Wait a second. I don't want to. I say okay. I don't want to paint too broad a brush. I mean, it's possible that God could have saved him from that, and he could be a Bible-believing Christian. It's possible that he could be a competent pastor despite going to seminary. Okay,
yes,
but
despite going to seminary. Thank you.
Okay, but okay, I'll just share my token dog story. This is about 25 years ago when I was going to my community college. I was talking to one of my anthropology instructors, and he was Irish Roman Catholic, and we we're talking about evolution, and we're talking about education. So one of his jobs is he's on the hiring committee for the school. So he helps determine whom the school hires. Now he's Irish Roman Catholic. I already said that, and he's pushing evolution. And he said, if I get an application and it turns out that it says that he went to Bob Jones or to Oral Roberts, I'll automatically reject it. Now I'm not advocating Oral Roberts by any stretch of imagination, but if he went to any overtly like Pensacola Bible College, I would automatically reject it because he's not the type of person we're looking for at our school.
That's right. They're looking for atheists and communists and fornicators and idolaters, and those people qualify. But anybody that has morality and believes in anything absolute, especially the Bible, that forbidden book, the Bible, we can't have him here.
Yes. So anyhow, I just wanted to share a couple of current events. So did you know that Mexico now has a new president-elect?
No, I did not.
Neither did I until yesterday. Her name, yes, I think she's a woman, is Claudia Sheinbaum.
A Jew. So
yeah.
Mexico has a Jewish white woman for a president?
Correct. Her parents were of Lithuanian and Bulgarian descent.
Yeah, and that's just great. I'm sure the Mexicans love that.
So I never heard of her until yesterday, much to my chagrin, because I'm sorry, I don't follow Mexican politics perhaps as closely as I should. But it's interesting. Her birthday is June the 24th, 1962. So it's coming up in a couple of weeks or a few weeks. So which is the date that's known as St. John's Day. It was also on that date in 1717. The Jesuits created Scottish Rite Freemasonry.
I see. Very right. In England. Now,
yes.
Well, 1717?
Correct.
Well, I'm not sure about that. We want to check that out because maybe the first three rites you're talking about.
Okay, yes, that's probably the
Scottish Rite is the 4th to the 33rd, and that's created in 15. And what is it? Oh, is it 1524? There, 1754. That's the date, and it's in my book. And
okay, so
1754 is when they create Scottish Rite in England.
Okay, so I'm sorry, maybe that's York Rite. And if somebody wants to correct me on that, please feel free to do so.
Well, the Grand Lodge of England opened in 1717, so you're absolutely right about that. But it was not Scottish Rite. But go ahead.
Okay, well, I beg your pardon. Well, thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome.
So you have this. Claudia Sheinbaum, who was the first female president of Mexico, and is also the first Jewish president of Mexico.
And I guarantee you the Mexicans are going to hate that. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
I would be interested to see who backed her. Who counted the votes. Because a Mexican should be the president of Mexico. Not a...
Well, she was actually
Jewish. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's having women in politics. That's a disparate conversation altogether.
Yep.
Okay. However, if she checks off all the boxes. She got her PhD from University of California, Berkeley in biology, I think. So she went to a secular school for undergrad degree. I'm sorry, I'm having some issues with my internet, so I wish I could be a little bit more precise with my information. So she went to Cal for her PhD. And I guess over the weekend she was at some sort of event or some sort of speech, and she's holding her hands together and she's making like a circle. And I looked that up, and that's definitely Masonic.
Mm-hmm. I see. Maybe it's something to do with the Ouroboros or something like that.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, okay, Donald Trump, and yes, I need to talk about him in just a moment. He nervously makes a couple hand signals. He holds when he's sitting down, he likes making a triangle with his hand. And when he's giving a speech, he's constantly making what appears to be the OK signal.
Yeah, which is really 666.
Yes, indeed. So he's, despite his apologies, saying that he's an outsider, he's very much part of the club.
Of course, that's why he was president. That's why they're creating all this sympathy for him now for another term.
Yeah. So are you talking about what happened last week in New York?
Yes.
Okay.
I said they were going to find him guilty. And then it's going to go to appellate court, and they'll sustain it. And then it's going to go to Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will reverse it. And everybody will say, "See, he was innocent," of course he was. And then all the white people, paganized that they become, and no Bible reading and no history for sure, they'll run right into the arms of the new right, Donald Trump, with certain Jews.
Okay, so before I address the whole Donald Trump situation, I need to mention something else about the new or the president-elect in Mexico. Earlier this year, France elected a new president, Gabriel Attal, who's Jewish and a homosexual. So he's the first Jewish president they've ever had, and the first open homosexual they've ever had.
That'll create plenty of anti-Jewish fury among those French Roman Catholics. Yep. That's what it's calculated to do. Yep.
Okay, is it possible that he could be a decent leader? I mean, I realize he,
a homosexual? Absolutely not. No. Not possible.
Okay, so are you saying the Jesuits installed him for a reason?
Of course. The Jesuits are a military order on the attack. And so they have many strings to their bow in weakening the nations, like the Lord says of Lucifer in Isaiah 14. And part of the weakening of the nations is to have them governed by homosexuals, like Hitler and other sinners. That weakens nations, that demoralizes them.
Well, okay, so I just wanted to address Donald Trump. I know I had to talk about the situation in France, in Mexico. Well, so for the listeners, in case they don't know, Donald Trump was found guilty of all 34 counts of whatever it is, paying off this hush money to Stormy Daniels. So the issue was he using campaign funds to pay her off? Now, it's not legal. It's not illegal to pay somebody off. However, which is odd. Since
Stormy Daniels was a good Catholic girl out of what was it? New Orleans area. Mm-hmm. So here we have this Catholic whore, and you have Trump. Probably she's right. I believe he did commit adultery with her, but that's typical for most of these presidents, except maybe Richard Nixon. And so they have done this, and they have found him guilty on all 36 counts to create sympathy for him, because there was no conspiracy to overturn the government. That's all Chucky Schumer Masonic Jew lies, run also by the Jesuits.
Well, and okay, so getting to the punchline. So why am I bringing this up on your stream? Well, turns out the judge in the case, Robert Costello, got his undergrad in law degrees from Fordham in New York City.
Oh, goody. So Mr. Costello, who is Hispanic by his name.
Well, I think he's Irish.
Irish. Well, there's a Spaniard in there somewhere because Costello is no Irish name.
Well,
so,
they actually,
anyway, he went to Fordham and got a top-notch law degree, and I wonder who paid for that. But go ahead.
Okay, so he got his undergrad and law degrees from Fordham.
Oh.
So he was at least double dipped. So there are even people who are not big fans of Donald Trump said there are all sorts of improprieties in the trials. So, for example, Trump's lawyers argue that he should get a change of venue. The trial was held in Brooklyn, and where Donald Trump only got 5% of the vote back in 2020. So the deck was stacked against him.
As intended. As intended. You think that he didn't know that, or that he could somehow not have got along with that if he exerted some judicial power and discernment? He wanted that because he knew he would be convicted, because he was told that by his Jesuit handler. Now just wait on, Donald. You're going to appeal this to these appellate court, this court of appeals, and you're going to lose there, Donald. But we'll make sure when you get to the Supreme Court, you're going to win there. And when you win there, Donald, you'll be a national hero. And we'll make you president. And then you can begin on the design that we've fashioned for you since you went to Fordham years ago. That's what's happening here.
Well, so indeed. So there, so the presidential selection, election is supposed to be on Guy Fawkes Day this year, November the 5th. And so you could have one of two reactions. Now, I think they're going to reinstall Donald Trump. No, that's just my gut feeling. But it's a lose-lose situation. So you're going to have tens of millions of people who are going to be happy because Donald Trump allegedly wins. Or then you're going to have an equal number of people who are unhappy if he loses.
It's a win-win, George, because the supposed equal number, I don't think it's an equal number, but supposed equal number that's unhappy about it, what are you going to do with them? There will be CIA assets leading them to violence. And that won't be hard to do. And then as they start rioting and pillaging and plundering with the savage Black Lives Matter and the savage white Antifa, when they get those people going up because they're getting paid by probably Masonic Jew George Soros working for the Jesuits, that will justify martial law. And the Jesuits want that. They want to impose martial law. So they have to have all this domestic unrest in the cities with all this violence and crime to justify it. That's why they've had the cops stand down for so long and let the savages tear the place apart, tear the cities apart. They want that because the great payoff will be the justification to declare martial law. Absolutism.
So you're talking about savagery and protest. And, that reminds me, back during the summer of 2020, so just about 4 years ago, after the whole George Floyd psyop, that precipitated all sorts of riots and protests across not just the U.S., but the world, Canada, Australia.
That was the press, George. The people of the world couldn't care less. The press facilitated it, and the Jesuit Coadjutors, among other nations, got certain of their followers together to do that. But the average European couldn't care less about the death of about the psyop of George Floyd because he wasn't killed.
Okay, so regardless of what happened to Floyd, so there's all sorts of backlash in places like England and Scotland. So there was a concerted effort in Scotland to remove statues of John Knox and Robert the Bruce.
That shows you right there the Jesuits were behind that because they don't want any memory of John Knox ever in Scotland, because that's what broke Scotland away from the temporal power of the Pope. If you read his great work, The Reformation in Scotland.
Well, also there was a call to remove the statue of William Wilberforce in Hull.
Is that right? Okay, now here's William Wilberforce in Hull. Remember, the Jesuits used the Nazis to bomb Hull in England. Hull was a sheer Protestant city. They destroyed the Protestant cathedral, and Churchill knew they were coming with his Enigma machine, that they had broken the German code when really they had been working together. And so Churchill decided not to warn Hull that it was going to be bombed. And so they bombed Coventry and Hull, two Protestant cities, as Germans did, overseen by the Jesuits, and Churchill enabled it. So now you have Hull, where there's a great statue of William Wilberforce, who after 20 years of his life that ultimately killed him, did away with the Atlantic slave trade. Why would you do away with William Wilberforce? Why would any blacks want to do away with him when he championed and succeeded in causing the ending of the Atlantic slave trade? Because William Wilberforce was a Protestant, a Bible-believing Protestant. And he believed it was his duty to end that iniquitous slave trade, as Jefferson called it, the iniquitous slave trade. So we're going to get rid of all Protestant monuments in America and in England, which I consider an act of high treason, and that anybody who wants to do that has committed a capital offense and should be hung. Go ahead, George.
Well, and of course, just to talk about a couple somewhat local items or semi-local items in Marin County, just south of me, there's a move back in 2020. There's a stretch of Highway 101 just north of San Francisco called Sir Francis Drake Drive, and they've called it that, I don't know, since the 19th century when they had horse and buggies, and they say, well, anyhow, so the Board of Supervisors.
Sir Francis Drake was a wonderful man. The Catholics hated him. The Spanish Catholics hated him because he would encounter silver ships of the Spanish and capture them and bring them to England. And they called him a pirate, etc., etc. He was no pirate. He was a Protestant, a Bible-believing Protestant, and he was loyal to his queen. And one more thing, Sir Francis Drake was involved in resisting the Spanish attack of the Armada in 1588, and he was one of the heroes of the battle. So naturally, we have to get rid of the great name of Sir Francis Drake.
Oh, okay. Of course, they had to pull the plug on. Well, they got a bunch of backlash in Marin County. So they had thousands of people who inundated the Board of Supervisors with phone calls and emails and said, no, we don't want you to change it. We like the name Sir Francis Drake. So finally, they relented. Also, in Marin County, there's a town called Mill Valley, where for 150 years they had a school in a school district called Dixie, which was named after a 19th century landholder named Dixie. Had nothing to do with the South, but they said, oh, well, it could have something to do with the South, so we should rename it.
Oh, let's rename it Zaire. How about that? Let's rename it Nigeria. How about that? Is that okay? Got to do away with white Protestant history every single time. Go ahead.
But as I said, this Dixie, whom the school and district were named for, had nothing to do with the South. She was from New York originally.
But you see, that's all the more reason to prove that they're out to destroy white Protestant Southern history, even though it had nothing to do with it. They're not irrational. This is what they're doing. It's a war. It's a war attack, and they're going to keep doing it. That's why they removed Nathan Bedford Forrest from the center of Memphis, because he was a white man, later a Protestant, and he was the greatest cavalry officer of the Confederacy. Took 31,000 prisoners in that war, in that communist invasion of the South. And so we can't have any white men that's repelling the communist invaders. So we're going to remove his statue too.
And of course, this happened, what, 3 years ago. They removed the statue of Stonewall Jackson from Richmond, Virginia. It was in downtown Virginia for 120 years. So, well, we obviously, before that, they removed his statue.
So we're going to remove Stonewall Jackson, who was the greatest general of the war, and of course the greatest Confederate general, who was betrayed by Robert E. Lee. And this man is Jackson, who was never successfully attacked from the rear. He also, as I mentioned, freed his slaves. And he also had his colored Sunday school, if you read his great biography by Dabney. He had his colored Sunday school where he taught the blacks, and they loved him. So we got to get rid of any white man that believes the Bible and was resisting Yankee Northern tyranny invasion into the white Protestant and Black Baptist South. That's the real reason.
So, and of course, something I've mentioned before. When the Vatican through the CIA installed the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia in 1975, one of the things they said that year, 1975, was year zero. Nothing or no one existed before that. So they had to get rid of all the evidence. So that means the books, the buildings, and the bodies.
Yeah.
And
the intellectuals too. Anybody that wore a pair of glasses, they got rid of him.
Well, yeah, or wore a watch or spoke a foreign language, especially French or English. So that was no bueno. And of course, even if you're in possession of a book, whether that was a capital offense. So it didn't matter whether you read the book.
A capital offense to be in possession of a book. Is that right, George?
Yes.
Yeah.
Including not even just the Bible, but so you're talking not that long ago in our lifetime, and probably in lifetime of most of your listeners. So, and what are they? So they're in recent years, particularly in America, but they've done this in other countries like Europe. They've removed statues. They've renamed things. They've renamed streets, bases, so forth. Because that's racist. That's bigoted. That's promoting slavery.
Yeah. And as I'm telling you, the Bible nowhere condemns the institution of slavery. Show me anywhere that it condemns it. And you see, that's what the Bible, white Protestant people of the South said to the radical red Republicans like William Lloyd Garrison and those other senators. Show me where in the Bible that the relationship of master-servant relation is condemned. And you know what they said? They said there's a higher law than the Bible. A higher law. And that's what these bastards are doing right now. There's a higher law than the Bible. It doesn't matter if these great white men founded the greatest nation in world history and they had black slaves. And they treated their black slaves well if they were generally Protestants and Baptists. So no, we got to completely do away with this history and go into savagery, dark age, Holy Roman Empire with a dictator, where the white men will not have any reason to resist because they don't know their history or the Bible.
Well, and of course, I'm not defending slavery per se, but you're right. Generally speaking, among the Baptists and Protestants, slaves are treated better. They usually have Sundays off, and many of them, they're allowed to have Sunday services. They were taught to read the Bible.
That's right.
And more, they had better clothing, better food,
Absolutely.
And they had actually real world skills. They could be carpenters, blacksmiths.
Yep. That's right.
That's
all true history. That's all true history, because you see, the Protestants of the South were fitting them to have their own country as they would repatriate them back to Africa. And that's what Hollis Reed tells us in his great work, the Hand of God in History. That's what he says. And so the Protestant leaders say, we've been chosen to fit these blacks with intellect and and being able to be literate and having trade so that they repatriate back to Africa and make a fantastic African empire. That's right there in Hollis Reed's work, The Hand of God in History, about 1856 he wrote it.
Okay, so you're talking about 160 some odd years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, and of course, most people have never heard of this author or this book because, well, I know we've had this discussion before. You know, all we need is basically Hollywood to dictate our reality to us, you know, about what life was for slaves and so forth.
Of course.
And so, you know, you just had this recent, as I said, you had this court ruling with Donald Trump, was it Thursday or Friday? Then, of course, you had this election this weekend in Mexico. So you don't think the Jesuits are trying to build the new rights in Mexico, do you?
Yeah, I do. It's going to be anti-Jew. It'll be Catholic and anti-Jew. It's like it's going to be here, Catholic and anti-Jew. It's like going to be in Canada, Catholic and anti-Jew. They're going to purge all the Jews out of North America and Mexico because it's going to be the three-part alliance, Mexico, America, and Canada. And it's all going to be anti-Jew. So they have to create the agitation necessary to get the people to hate the Jews.
And by the way, there's something that's been in my hopper for a couple of weeks. Well, I know I talk about bread and circuses on a regular basis, and to that end, I guess earlier this year in February, the Kansas City Chiefs won the Super Bowl, and they have a kicker on the team by the name of Harrison Butker. He's 28, almost 29, and I guess he's from Georgia originally. And Butker grew up Catholic, and like many of them, he basically became lukewarm in his faith as a teenager. But as an adult, after he got married, he decided to come back to the church, and he's very zealous. And I think he's like what they call a Latin Mass Catholic. So he and his wife have at least 2 children. And I guess last month he was speaking in Benedictine College, which is, I believe, somewhere in Kansas. And he was giving the commencement speech about his life, you know, the Kansas City Chiefs as a Catholic, as a husband, as a father. And he was addressing, I guess, he was talking to a female class. And he said, the greatest vocation any woman can have is to be a wife and a mother. And just like that's something my wife or his wife agrees to.
Yeah, see, that's how you continue your country, you see. Because if the women are not wives and mothers, your country gets to die in a generation. So if you want your country to continue and be in existence, the women have to have children, and the children have to be taught their history. And then you can facilitate your nation surviving as true nationalism and not part of the Pope's New World Order where nobody has any lineage, history, or unique language. So that's right. That is a Bible belief that this man has, even though he's Roman Catholic.
Okay, so I agree with just about everything he said, and I imagine most of your listeners would be. However, when the communist media got a hold of it, they weren't so generous. I guess the Kansas City Chiefs released a statement saying that Mr. Buckner's views do not reflect the views of our organization. We foster an environment of inclusive.
So if he would have come out and said, you know what, I'm a homosexual, my wife's a lesbian, or we're swingers, we like to trade spouses, nothing would have been said. They would have lauded it. He finally came out. They would have rewarded him for iniquity rather than reward him for righteousness. So it's just another reason why we have to declare our independence in our county or our state and get rid of this press. Send them all to communist China. And I'll tell you what, when they start lining up and coming into the ports of communist China, they're going to put them on trucks and they're going to ship them right to the communist work camps. Maybe that's where they need to go.
Well, yes, indeed. So, anyhow, so was talking about Marin County earlier, about Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. So just for clarification, it's still Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. It's still called that. Finally, the Board of Supervisors were said, we're getting too much backlash for this. For even as insane and crazy as they are in Marin County, they had to cave in. Now, I know I've mentioned Marin County before now, so just for clarification, you have San Francisco, and just north you have Marin County. So for those of you who are listening, just look at your invisible map, California. And so you'll have to draw all the lines of latitude and longitude and so forth. So you have San Francisco, you have Marin County, and just north of Marin County is Sonoma County, which is where I live. And so you may be wondering, how did I end up here? Well, something I mentioned on more than one occasion is my father was career Air Force, and the last place he was stationed was Hamilton Air Force Base in Nevada, which is in the northern part of the county. So that's how we ended up here. So my dad got out of the Air Force in the early 1970s, and he was thinking about moving back to the Midwest, but my older siblings said, we like it here. We like the weather and all that stuff. So that's why we stayed in this area. So you're probably not, okay, so that's my semi-second Shaggy Dog story.
Okay.
And
hey, George.
So, but Marin County is one of the most expensive jurisdictions in the country. It's probably in the top 10 in terms of how expensive things are, and that has been the case for a long time, since at least the 1960s. So when houses, were worth $50,000 in the country, they were worth $100,000 in Marin County. When they were worth $100,000 in the country, they were worth $200,000. Yeah,
well, I think Marin County is primarily white.
Yes,
white county. So that's how you keep the blacks out. Just make sure the prices are high, the houses are high. Therefore, you can't scream racism and prejudice. It's just a matter of economics, why they can't afford it. And that's why they've done it. Yep.
Okay. So to that, now, as I said, Mexico is going to be...
Not that I believe in race mixing or miscegenation. I believe in racial separation under nationhood, but this is what they have resorted to because we do not have the freedom of association anymore as white people. And so we've had to sin and jack up prices of property to keep the blacks out, when we should just be able to say, this is for whites. This is the white area. You got your black area. You got Chester County here in Pennsylvania, and we have our white area. And what's the problem? Since when is advocating miscegenation righteous? It's not. It's unbiblical. Go ahead.
Well, I wasn't going to address the whole idea of integration, i.e. desegregation, but there's a famous... There are a number of quotes from Joe Biden when he was a senator in the 1970s. He said, I oppose integration because I don't want my children growing up in a jungle.
He was right. He was right.
Okay, so
he's repudiated all that. Yeah. And we have 10 murders of 10 white people a day by these majority savage blacks as opposed to the minority civil blacks. You got 10 murdered white people every day on the average and 100 raped white women every day on the average. And that will further beat down and destroy the white race that founded the country and ultimately is the only people able to resist the post-white power structure. So miscegenate them, race mix them, make them victims of black on white crime everywhere. That's what we want. Wreck the cities, wreck San Francisco, wreck inner city Chicago, just keep doing it. And that facilitates the new right.
Okay, so speaking of Marin County, I guess in September, they're going to be getting a new public health officer. The current public health officer, Matt Willis, is retiring. So his assistant, Lisa Santora, Santoa, is going to be taking over in a few months. And Mrs. Santora got her undergrad degree from Fairfield University in Fairfield, Connecticut, which is a Jesuit school. So Willis was that.
Is she Hispanic? Santora, is she Italian?
I think she's Hispanic.
Okay. Well, good. I would think all the Hispanics ought to rule over us white people. Tell us what to do. That's a real solution, wouldn't you say? Again,
Well,
just outraging the white people into the new right. Go ahead, George.
okay, so Willis was bad. In terms of, say, tyranny, Marin County was probably, the tyranny here was just about as egregious as it was anywhere else in California and the U.S. And I will be sad to see Matt Wells go. But if they try this same thing again that they did in 2020, I'm sure that Santoro will be all on board for it. Now, that's Marin County, which is south of where I live.
Yeah, she'll be all aboard because she was educated by the communist Jesuits, and she'll do what they tell her to do. We gave you your education, and now you're going to work where we want you to work, and you're going to do what we tell you to do. You got that? Okay. That's why they like women in places of power, too, because women will do exactly what they're told to do without a twinge of conscience, generally speaking.
Okay, so now that's Marin County, but Sonoma County, where I live, this happened in November, so you're talking about 6 months ago. We actually have a new public health officer. Her name is Tanya Ferris, Phares. I'm not sure what derivation. She's white, but previously she had worked for St. Mary's Catholic Healthcare in Reno, Nevada.
Was she related to Ferris Bueller?
Well, she probably can. Difference. Well, Ferris is her surname. Tanya is her Christian name. But and yeah, so she took over in November. So in a few months you're going to be having this Lisa Santoro, who was educated by the Jesuits in Connecticut. Right now you have Tanya Ferris in Sonoma County, who used to work with Catholic Healthcare, St. Mary's Healthcare System in Reno, Nevada. You don't think anything ominous could possibly happen, do you?
Like what, George? What do you think?
Oh, like more lockdowns and more scares and things like that. I mean, they've both been doing this since last year with the whole bird flu nonsense. Did you know that since November last year, okay, speaking of trivial stuff, they've culled at least 250,000 chickens in Sonoma County?
Well, George, I think that needs to be done. I think we need to destroy all the food manufacturers so that people can eat bark off the tree and grass out of the fields because, after all, we evolved and we came from the lower animals. And so we need to go back to eat those kinds of things, locusts and grasshoppers, maybe chocolate-covered ants. And so that will do away with any need to have any protein that might give you strength and energy to resist the sinners. Go ahead.
Okay, so I've not looked into this, and I'm sorry, that's a glaring oversight on my part. Perhaps I can talk about this next week, but I understand that Anthony Stephen Fauci testified before Congress yesterday about the alleged origins of COVID. And I could just tell you that it's going to be a complete waste of time. Nothing's going to happen. He's not going to be arrested. He's not going to lose his pension.
Of course not. Anthony Fauci, the Jesuit, the evil, wicked Rodin. Remember the book, The Wandering Jew? The most evil Jesuit, his name was Rodin. So Anthony Fauci, I call him Rodin. And Rodin, completely and absolute in obedience to his Jesuit masters, is untouchable, just like Rodin was untouchable. And he was in the senior executive service, which runs the country for the Pope, highest paid people. Fauci got paid more money as head top in the senior executive service than did the president. So Fauci is untouchable because there's no U.S. attorney in the Department of Justice that would touch him because the Jesuits have a death grip in the Department of Justice and who will be prosecuted and who will not. And Anthony will not be. Go ahead.
Okay, I know we've talked about him several times in the last several years, but shall I just give people a quick background or give his creds, so to speak?
I will give you, George, I will give you a dispensation to do so. Go ahead and speak freely, my son.
Okay, so Anthony Stephen Fauci was born on December the 24th, 1940. I'm going here from memory. He went to Regis High School in Manhattan, New York, which is Jesuit. Then he went to Holy Cross, where he got his undergrad degree in biology. And he got his medical degree from Cornell. So in 1968, he was hired by the National Institutes of Health, where he would work for the next 54 years until 2022.
That has
in 1984,
of the birth certificates. That's where the Jesuits hold on to all the property and labor with the birth certificates. Yeah, go ahead.
Now, he in 1984, he became the director of the National Institutes of Infectious Disease. So he held that position for the remainder of his career. In 2022, 2 years ago, he officially resigned after being there, the NHS, for over half a century, 54 years. Then, I guess,
and nobody ever brought out the fact that he was a Jesuit temporal coadjutor, educated by Jesuits, working with that other Italian Catholic center with the AIDS pandemic. What was his name? Robert Gallo. Gallo and Fauci are good brother Roman Catholic papal knights. And nobody ever brings this out. It's a pity. Go ahead.
Okay, so after he officially resigned, and his base salary was something like $480,000, so almost $500,000.
Yeah.
So he gets about 3/4 of that. That's just his base salary. That's not including all the kickbacks he's getting from Pfizer and Moderna and book deals and speaking engagement and so forth. So he's probably worth at least several $100 million, if not a billionaire. Now, when he officially retired, I guess in the autumn of 2022, he actually became an adjunct professor at Georgetown University, where he and his wife Christine.
Yeah, a Jesuit Georgetown.
Well, as a matter of fact, he and his wife Christine were married at Georgetown University.
Oh, goody. Wonderful. And you got that John de Goya there, who's out of Malta, who's the president of Georgetown.
So, and I know we talked about his wife before. So just for clarification, Christine Grady got her undergrad and PhD from Georgetown. She got her master's degree from Boston College.
Oh, she must really be wonderful. Oh, I just love to talk to her. All these degrees, especially from the Jesuits. Great. We need to hire her on our academic staff, George.
Yeah. So, and as I said, this is back in 2021, May the 20th. So this happened just over 3 years ago. She had received, or she had both Anthony Fauci and his wife Christine received the, for the greater glory of God, ad majorem
Dei gloriam. That's right.
Yes, award from Georgetown University. And actually, I think I sent you the video on that. So, and he's also a known Freemason and suspected knight, as you said.
Fauci's a Freemason.
Oh, yes.
Good. Well, that's why he and Donald Trump got along so well, and Trump appointed him to take on the whole coronavirus. And brother Freemason Anthony Fauci will lead the way. Amen. And we'll use the military to make sure everybody gets vaccinated. Yeah, thank you, Donald Trump. Go ahead.
Okay, so I mentioned him last week. There's a fellow who has a YouTube site called Debunk the Funk with Dan Wilson. And I know we talked about he lives in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. He's from Harrisburg originally, but I think he lives in Pittsburgh. And so over the last 4 years or so, he's done a number of videos in which he has allegedly refuted various claims from people about the existence of SARS-CoV-2, his alleged isolation and purification, vaccine safety in general, and with COVID. Well, he recently, or the last year or so, he did a video on dealing with Robert Francis Kennedy Jr.'s book on the real Anthony Fauci. And so Wilson's attitude was, well, I read it for you, so you didn't have to. And it's complete, utter
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad somebody can read for me and tell me the truth. I don't want to do that. We need you priests to tell us the way it really is, and that's what he's acting like.
Okay, so so Wilson came out and said, "Now I'm trying not to be too mean on Bobby. You know, he's had a very traumatic life, because if you look at all the tragedies that have taken place almost since his childhood, such as, for those of you who don't know, this is Wilson talking. Robert Francis Kennedy Jr. is the son of RFK Sr. Now, his dad was a presidential candidate in 1968 and a senator from New York and an attorney general under his older brother, Jack. So Bobby was so this is something that Wilson's. So in 1968, June the 5th, so the anniversary is coming up tomorrow, 56 years ago, Bobby Kennedy was murdered by Sirhan Bassra Sirhan in Los Angeles at the Embassy Hotel.
And they did it. Of course, he didn't do it. But Sirhan. Oh, okay. We won't talk about Thane Caesar. We won't talk about him, will we? But we're going to blame Sirhan. Like we're going to blame the Tennessee Waltz guy that allegedly shot King, and he didn't shoot him. Or James Earl Ray, he didn't do that. And so this guy's just another establishment liar to mislead the people into believing that, it just happened, and all these things are true that have been reported in this country for the last 60 years. And he's like another Neil deGrasse Tyson, that mulatto that wants people to believe that the earth lives in the shape of a pear and it wobbles. I mean, typical propaganda of the white power structure that rules the world for the Pope.
Okay. So, yes, having said that, so if you look at all these tragedies that have befallen Bobby Jr. and his family, there's the death of his father, Bobby Sr. There was in 1969. Now, this is Dan Wilson talking. His uncle Teddy was involved in an unfortunate car crash in which one of his staffers died.
Yeah, in which she was shot in the back of the head with a .22, according to a man I met in Nevada, Carson City, whose father was a coroner, and he knew the connection there. And when she was taken out of the car, she had blood that originated in the back of her head. It ran down between her breasts, and so she was shot in the back of the head by good old Teddy. She didn't drown.
Okay. Then, of course, there's his uncle Jack, who had a little mishap in Dallas, Texas, on November the 22nd, 1963. But before that, you also had
shot by a lone nut, Lee Harvey Oswald. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Then there was before Bobby was born, there was his older uncle Joe was killed in a plane crash over England, which is an unfortunate tragedy. But then he also had who was the aunt who got who was the one who got lobotomized? Was it Mary?
I think so. It was one of Joe Kennedy's daughters. Because you know why? Because she was dating a Protestant. And so that's why the bastards gave her lobotomy.
Okay. So, and I'm sure somebody can. Okay, my internet is being weird, so I could go look it up. So Bobby had all these bad things happen to his relatives. Then one of his wives died under mysterious circumstances. And Wilson said, by the way, contrary to what Bobby asserts, the CIA had nothing to do with the death of his father or his uncle Jack. That's right. That's right.
Just forget the hundreds of books that have proved it. Just forget Colonel Fletcher Prouty, who proved it in his book JFK, and just forget it all. Forget Taylor. What's her name? Farewell to Justice by Caldwell, where she proves it. I mean, it's one book after another that proves the CIA was involved in it. But oh no, it didn't do it. Angleton covered it up. I mean, got Joseph Trento's giving Angleton his final interview, and Angleton says we killed thousands of people. Go ahead.
Okay, so anyhow, so just listen to Dan Wilson. So just listen to the professionals. Just listen to the experts. Listen to the CDC. Listen to the World Health Organization. Listen to Tony Fauci.
Yeah, listen to the press.
You'll be fine. Yes, Sarah's Kobe.
Listen to Walter Cronkite. Listen to Lawrence O'Donnell, that fanatical Irish Catholic millionaire socialist. Yeah. Listen to Sean Hannity, another fanatical Irish Italian Roman Catholic. Just And just believe all these Irish Catholics, and you'll be fine. They'll tell you the truth every time for the Pope.
Okay, but however, as I said, trying to be earnest here. Now, Bobby Jr. Maybe he has a conscience, but maybe he's just simply playing a role of being the leader of the resistance, the voice of reason. You know, after all, he is a Kennedy. I mean, he went to Georgetown prep school.
Yeah. They're using him like they used Theodore Roosevelt and the Progressive Party to pull votes away from the one that they wanted to be president, which ultimately was Woodrow Wilson. So that's just like they used that guy, he was 33rd degree Freemason with his own part, Ross Perot, to pull votes away from the conservatives so Clinton would become president. That's their game.
And of course, if you listen to Ross Perot, you know, he's easy to mimic. I agree with most of the things that he said.
Sure.
You know, he was talking about the dangers of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. He said that huge sucking sound is all those jobs leaving the U.S. And sure enough, that happened.
Yeah. Destroying domestic manufacturers. And you can't have a sovereign nation with no domestic manufacturers. And the ones who pushed that was that filthy Lee Iacocca, involved in the Kennedy assassination and covering up the primary strikes of the limousine. But then you also have that filthy Jesuit-trained Billy Boy Clinton. So Iacocca went to Clinton's office and encouraged him to sign NAFTA. That's Lee Iacocca, the supposed savior of Chrysler, encouraging Clinton to sign NAFTA. And Iacocca is the Knight of Malta, and so is Billy Boy Clinton.
Well, you know, it's interesting. You know, you're talking about these people. You know, you have controlled opposition, and you have leaders of the. Now, I was talking to Steve Drake about that. Was it yesterday about that whole expression, controlled opposition, and I don't have a source for it, but allegedly it is attributed to Vladimir Lenin, aka Vladimir Ulyanov. He's supposed to, back in the early 20th century, he's supposed to have said the best way to control your opposition is to lead it yourself. As I said, I don't have a source for that. Well, it sounds like something he would say. And so you need to give people hope. You need to give people.
That's what Alex Jones is doing. Identical. Give people hope and never give them the right answer. And who's the problem? Just continue the agitation. Yep.
Okay, so people like Alex Jones, if that's his real name, they're very good at identifying symptoms, like Paul Joseph Watson over in England. They talk about how insane the communists are, and I like watching Paul Joseph Watson videos because they're funny. He talks about, I'll watch my language. He said, such and such town, San Francisco is a poop hole. London is a poop hole. Paris is a poop hole. And he talks about what the communists, the progressives have done to those respective communities. And everything he says is correct. But he never says why. He never says who's responsible.
That's right.
And
can't do that because that would solve the problem. Now, we don't want to solve the problem. We want to continue the agitation.
Okay. And something most people don't know, Paul Joseph Watson is actually Catholic. But, and, you do have some semi-reasonable Catholic voices, such as the aforementioned Paul Joseph Watson. Another one is Matt Walsh. I happen to agree with most of the things he says, just like I agree with this kicker,
sure,
Harrison.
Sure, that's how you unite the Catholics and the white Protestants together. You got to give them some common ground there to agree upon. That's what the whole Phyllis Schlafly and the women's voting rights was all about, uniting white Protestants and Catholics against the what was it, the women's ERA amendment. Yeah. You got to unite the white Catholics and the white Protestants together against communism. That's what they did in the 50s and the 60s.
Okay, so regarding specifically Matt Walsh, as I said, I agree with most of the things he says. Like he did a famous video, say a year or two ago, called "What Is a Woman?" So it's just, however, if you think about it, it's just like making that. Did you know that water is wet? So and it seems as if that people are questioning basic commonsensical facts that aren't partisan, or they're non-partisan, non-controversial, and now they are. Everything is up for debate. And however, more recently, Walsh did a video about people who subscribe to the moon landing hoax, and he specifically talked about that. And he wasn't talking, and he said, "I know there are a number of you who like watching me, who like taking contrarian views on various issues, such as 9/11, but I'm not going to address that. I'm going to talk about this."
That's because anybody that knows their stuff, anybody that knows the facts, will crush him in debate.
Okay, so specifically, he's something that's been popular for almost 60 years now. Was Apollo 11, the alleged moon landing, a hoax? And he said, well, this has been popular almost long before the internet. You have people talking about this back then. Well, that would be a little bit difficult because you'd have, this is according to Walsh, that would require at least thousands of people keeping a secret in several different disciplines, not just NASA, but the media,
the Department of Defense. No, it wouldn't. And only a handful keep the secret because the handful controls everything else. See, that's another idiotic thing that he would say.
Mm-hmm. And I agree, and you're absolutely right. Because
has he ever watched Collier and Collier's Was It Really a Paper Moon? Did you ever watch that for 2 hours? Huh? When he goes to Smithsonian and proves there was no way they could get out of their capsule there with that backpack on and land. It was impossible. The opening was not big enough. And he goes on and shows one thing after another that it was absolutely a hoax. Was it really a paper moon? It's a video. It's 2 hours long. Did this guy, did Mr. Watson or Wilson watch this? Of course not.
Well, his name is Matt Walsh. Yes, he's
Matt Walsh. Did Matt Walsh watch this? Huh? Did you watch it with an open mind? I don't think so.
Okay, so I remember back in July 1979, for the would have been the so-called 10th anniversary of the moon landing, around about July the 20th. I remember listening to my local talk show station, and the host of the program said, "Well, where were you on around July the 20th of 1969?" So it would have been like a day or two later. And people were calling in and say, "Oh, I just got back from Vietnam," or "I was about to ship off to Vietnam," or "I was getting ready to go to college," or "I just proposed to my girlfriend," or whatever. So people, and I was 10 years old, and of course I believe we went to the moon because that was what I was taught.
Yeah.
And
that's what LBJ said. LBJ wouldn't lie to us, would he? No. Even though he got that Cannon Air Force baked mock up there with all the sand and everything, and pretending that's where they're going to land at the Cannon Air Force Base inside that mock up. We can't talk about that.
So, so you got all these easy questions, but one of the callers, I don't recall his name. We're talking like 45, 46 years ago, said, "Nope, we didn't go to the moon." And the call, rather than hanging up on him, the host was intrigued. And he said, "Really? Why do you say that?" And I said, "Well, you can't land on the moon. It's physically impossible. You can't get out of low Earth orbit." And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Have a good day." And this is when things were a little bit freer in America, where you could propose. And so he said, "Well, it takes it takes all kinds of people." So he just simply dismissed the caller as a kook. And I remember I was driving around with my dad. Oh, this is like a semi shaggy dog story. And I remember asking my dad, "Hey, what do you mean he didn't think we went to the moon? Did we go to the moon?" And he said, "I don't know." And
It
And
isn't matter. These Russian scientists come out. One, I think it was in the country, said they're not going to be landing on the moon because the moon is a plasma disk. Huh?
okay, so
anyway,
what if you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so something I mentioned to you before. This is years ago. That after the Second 30 Years' War, aka World War II, television became commercially available in the U.S. It was available on a limited basis in the 1930s, but it wasn't until really after 1945 where people could actually buy one. Now, there are several issues: reception and price, because it was cost prohibitive for most people. However, despite these problems, by 1960, so 64 years ago, 90% of American homes had at least one of these objects in their house. And I'll repeat that. By 1960, 9 out of 10 American homes had a TV in their house.
Yeah.
So that was one of the major feats of social engineering, if I do say so, because that little box basically dictated reality to us.
Yeah.
To where, not only you watch comedies and dramas and get the news and sports and all that sort of stuff, but you got insight into foreign policy, economics, social discourse.
Nobody was ever told about the power of the Pope. Nobody was ever told, even the Council on Foreign Relations. The only one talking about the CFR was the John Birch Society, and they were all blacklisted as a bunch of fanatical right-wing kooks. So, yeah. And then we're going to have the Israeli attack on the USS Liberty. We're going to blame the Jews for it when it was fact Francis Cardinal Spellman and LBJ that okayed it. Of course, CIA oversees Mossad, but we won't talk about any of those important matters. We just want to see the Super Bowl, and we want to watch basketball. Go ahead.
Okay, so I mentioned the fact. So in 1960, so almost all Americans had at least one television at home. So that would basically what would happen in the 1960s? Well, you had the little thing. Well, you have both the Kennedy assassinations, Malcolm X, King, Michael Martin Luther King. You had the Vietnam War. You had the Civil Rights Movement, which had already begun, but you had the anti-war movement. You had the hippie movement, and you had all the so-called counterculture. And people were able to watch this every night, and many of whom were able to watch it in color. So you got daily updates, like you had your buddy Walter Cronkite say, "Well, today this week, 200 soldiers died in Vietnam defending our country against communism."
And you know why they put that anchor position? Because he was a correspondent in Germany during the war trial of in Nuremberg, and because he covered up the pre-Steele involvement in this, and Walsh was there, Jesuit Edmund Walsh. They made him the anchor man for what? CBS. Good one, Walter.
Okay, and I know that among other things, Walter Cronkite was Jacques de Molay, and he's a CFR, Council of Foreign Relations. So he was their boy for decades. Then they replaced him.
He went to the Bohemian Grove too. Yeah.
Yes. Then they replaced him with not Dan Aykroyd, but might as well have been Dan. I'm sorry. Dan Mather, who's a Freemasonic.
Yeah. Dan Smather. That's who they put there because he was a faithful liar in the Kennedy assassination. I saw his head jerk forward. His head just jerked forward at the shot. So that's giving credence to Oswald that the shot that kills Kennedy comes from behind and not from the front. And so because he was a good boy in that cover up, that's what they did for him.
Okay, so if you serve the horror wall, you often will receive a handsome payout, but not always. You'll be allowed to be. Sometimes, you might become governor, senator, anchor for your TV station, your national or whatever. You could become like district attorney. Sometimes some payouts aren't always as notable as others. Now,
if you want to see this illustrated in the movie, you got to see Brotherhood of the Bill with Glenn Ford.
Well, we actually talked about that a couple weeks ago after the death of Dabney Coleman, because he had a bit part in the film where he played an FBI agent. Glenn Ford's character goes and tries to make a complaint. And Coleman, you probably don't recognize him because he doesn't have a mustache in the film. So the Freemasonic.
They tell him, you see your wife there? We arranged that. He said the IRS gave you an audit. Who do you think arranged that? So he's telling him, the head really of the Brotherhood, he was a bald-headed white guy, we did all these things. And then Glenn Ford says to him, well, you really don't care about anybody else, do you? And he said, no. So there was a perfect portrayal of the secret society, high-level Freemasonry run by the Jesuits in Brotherhood of the Bell. And then they had that William Conrad there who says, I'll bet you even think this goes back to the Vatican and the bell of St. Peter's. Yeah, trying to make him look like he's crazy. Yeah. It's a tremendously well done film. Pardon me.
Well, of course, they do come out with gems every now and then in which they actually tell you the truth about, was it Jordan Maxwell said, basically Hollywood tells you, the Jesuits tell you what they have done, what they are doing, or what they're going to do.
That's right. And Jordan Maxwell would know. He was, I forget what his real name was, but it's Italian Roman Catholic, and he was raised around the papacy. So he knew exactly what they were doing.
Okay. So having said, now I mentioned about what was on the docket in the 1960s. Now I really don't remember that because I was born at the end of the decade. So the first actual decade I recall was the 1970s, and I could talk about that perhaps at other times. And of course, a major element was the so-called counterculture or the hippie movement, which is popular in and around your major colleges and campuses, such as the aforementioned University of California, Berkeley, Columbia, New York, Harvard, Yale,
all left wing,
Northwestern,
long-haired, smoking dope. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the major element
presence like Abby Hoffman and others. Good.
Okay, so a major element of this was music, particularly rock music, and there's different genres or subgenres like folk rock and so forth, and acid rock and so forth. But I'd just like to spend a few minutes talking about some of the popular bands from that era, specifically in and around San Francisco, mostly during the 1960s.
Yeah.
And we talked about one of their puppets, Janis Joplin. And well, this is your, okay, don't mean to sound old, brother, but this is your era. Her backup band.
It is.
Okay.
She was sex pot when she was screaming and yelling on the stage. Yeah. And then you had the other bands too. You had Hendrix. Hendrix was demon possessed. There's nobody could play the guitar like he could ever play the guitar. And he's black, of course, and he had to have his white women. And what else? You had Quicksilver Messenger Service with John Coppola. He was a fantastic lead guitarist. I used to try to learn his leads. And you have Iron Butterfly. And I got it, Davida, honey. And then you have Quicksilver. You have the Iron Butterfly. You have, what's that other one? Chicago. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
you have all these bands that were tremendous musicians. The Grateful Dead with Jerry Garcia. Tremendous musicians, because I maintain the vast majority of them were demon possessed. I was at the Fillmore one night and I saw these guys performing, and the black dude was playing the bongos, and he looked completely demon possessed. So, demon possessed, smoking dope, demoralizing the culture in preparation for their children that would come along would be more demoralized than they are. Go ahead, George.
Okay, I was planning on talking about the band Chicago, but not today because that's a different subject altogether.
Yeah,
and you'll find out why. As I said.
Yeah.
Okay, so
George, so just go ahead.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
We're at 1:14, an hour and 14 minutes now. So.
Okay, so this will be basically so just talking about the band, Big Brother and Holding Company. So most people probably couldn't name any of the band members besides Janis Joplin. Well, the two leading figures were Sam Andrew, who was born Sam Houston Andrew III, who lived from the 18th of December, 1941, died on February the 12th, 2015. He he went to school at University of San Francisco, which is Jesuits, and his father was career Air Force. Now that's something that Dave McGowan talks about, not specifically about Andrew, but about how most of your prominent rock musicians of the 1970s and 60s and 70s had a military background, if not they themselves. You're talking their parents, or they're involved in intelligence, or something along those lines. So Andrew's
like the Doors, Jim Morrison. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, and we've talked about the Doors before. So Sam Houston Andrew was the guitarist for Big Brother and Holding Company, and he went to University of San Francisco. So another bandmate was James Gurley, James Martin Gurley, who lived from the 22nd of December 1939, died on December 20, 2009. So he was 69, almost 7 years old. So he grew up Roman Catholic, and he went to Detroit Catholic Brothers School of the Holy Cross in Detroit. And as a matter of fact, he was a seminarian.
Ah, goody. So he was wanting to become a priest. Great.
Well, I guess he decided. So these are the two frontmen for Big Brother and Holding Company. Now, you made reference to the Grateful Dead. They were basically a CIA cutout. They liberally handed out drugs, specifically acid and LSD, at their concerts. Now, you mentioned their lead singer, Jerry Garcia, who was
handed out LSD for Timothy Leary. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So Jerry Garcia grew up a Spanish Roman Catholic, and he was in the army. He did a 2-year stint. So his dates were the 1st of August 1942, died in August the 9th, 1995. So he was 53 years old. He lived in the aforementioned Marin County. So he almost certainly had an intelligence background. He was almost certainly working for so I'd imagine most of these bands were either complete CIA creations, or they were hybrids. They may have been real bands, but they got backing from the company.
I will tell you, those guys were fabulous musicians. And I don't think there's a group of musicians in existence today that can match them. So we have to give them that. And maybe it was just because they're all demon possessed.
Okay, well, this is something we've been discussing before. But if you look at other bands like the Beach Boys, or say the Beatles, the Beatles definitely were a complete Tavistock creation. So they had professional musicians writing their music and recording for them. They just simply dubbed their voices. And of course, when they did their shows, they had to perform a few of the songs. And if you remember, it's usually they're fairly simple ones, like with the Beatles, it was like "Love Me Do" or "I Want to Hold Your Hand," things like that. They're bubblegum type music that was popular in the early days.
Right.
And
the Beach Boys, the Beach Boys. I love the Beach Boys. They could sing such wonderful harmony with Brian Wilson leading the way, and I watched a special on him recently, and turns out that his father sold all of his songs, all of his rights to the songs, for $700,000, and the Beach Boys music came back in another generation. It made $150 million. And so those guys were out of all that money because of what the father had pulled on them. That's a special on Netflix you can watch on the Beach Boys.
Well, okay, so I realize we're coming up on an hour and a half long. So at least the United States.
You're getting windier and windier. I won't know what's wrong with you, but it's all your fault.
Sorry about that. At least in the United States, almost all the bands that were popular in the 1960s, at least in terms, say, most of the white bands, such as the aforementioned Beach Boys, the Association, the Buffalo Springfield, the Byrds, Jan and Dean, the Association,
right?
It's usually the Wrecking.
Yeah, but then you had some beautiful black singers too. that could carry tone. They were just very melodic. You had Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. You had lots of them that were very melodic and musical. And so I say the black music of that era is the finest black music ever, ever. And
so yeah, you're talking about Motown, Barry Gordy. But okay, that's okay. I'm not prepared to present on that, but I do want to talk about Motown in a different show. So you had the Wrecking Crew that basically provided the album, the music for the albums for bands of the 1960s, such as the Beach Boys, the other ones I mentioned. But a band that was also popular in that era, was Jefferson Airplane. They later became known as Jefferson Starship, and later just Starship.
Yeah, Grace Slick.
And so
she named her child God. Never forget that. Mm-hmm. Always angry. She was always angry. Go ahead.
Her future husband, and I guess the guitarist was Paul. Now,
give me the name again. You just cut out on me. Okay.
Paul Cantor, Kanter. So he had an Irish Catholic mother, but a German Jewish father. But he was raised Catholic.
Of course.
Okay. So in that end, he actually, before he joined, they formed the Jefferson Airplane, or the CAE formed the Jefferson Airplane. Cantor went to Santa Clara University, where he got his undergrad degree.
Great.
So he was basically considered to be the brains of. In addition to performing the music, he also got into the music writing and things like that.
And it was all rebellion, throwing off authority, smoking dope, committing fornication. It was just real high morality music. Just great stuff. Perfect for the civil rights.
Okay, but if you think about it, the signature songs for Jefferson Airplane were White Rabbit and Do You Need, or was it, what is the song? Do You Need Somebody to Love? Or however it goes. I'm sorry, pushing the title. But one more group I like to mention, and I know you're not a big fan of theirs, but no conversation can be complete about 1960s Northern California music unless you mention something about Creedence Clearwater Revival, CCR, or Creedence. And I know you said you didn't really care for them.
No. John Fogerty was no guitarist. And you know what? John Fogerty took lessons from probably the greatest guitarist in California, maybe on the West Coast. His name was Jimmy Luttrell. And my teacher was Dan Boyd. And Jimmy Luttrell was so good that he went to a lesson with Dan Boyd, and Dan said, "This guy is utterly fantastic. He's much better than I am, and all I need to do is teach him to read music." But Jimmy Luttrell taught a lot of these lead guitarists like Mike Suzaki of Cold Blood and others. He was probably the greatest guitarist in California at the time, even better than Joe Pass.
Okay, so if I could just spend a moment or two talking about CCR, Creedence Clearwater Revival. They were formed in 1959, and they're originally known as the Blue Velvets. Like most bands at the time, they're just simply, they did covers. They were performing other people's material. And they did the standards like Muddy Waters, Bo Diddley, whatever was popular at the time. And they did that for probably until the mid-1960s. Now, there are four members of CCR. The aforementioned John Fogerty, his older brother Tom, was born in 1941 and died in 1990. And I can talk about his death in a moment. And you have the drummer, Doug Clifford, and the bassist, Stu Cook. Now, Clifford, Cook, and John Fogerty are still alive. And I can talk about Tom's death in just a moment. So, like most other bands of their era, they're just covers, They do weekend gigs and things like that. But in 1965, John Fogerty met Saul Zantz. What does that sound like to you?
So I met this Jew that was a producer, right?
Yes, who founded Fantasy Record. Now, I don't have a, okay, I'm having issues with my internet, but Saul Zantz was involved with Army intelligence in World War II. And I just, it could be a coincidence. Uh, and he said, you know what, John, I think I like you. You have some talent. Can I hear you? Can I get a demo? I'm just paraphrasing. Sure. So at the time, they changed their name to the Gollywogs. And Tom Fogerty was the lead singer. And so Zan said, all right, I don't like the name Gollywogs. Come up with something else. And also, I want you, John, to be the frontman. And so that created a bit of a rift to the band. So, and I also want you to be basically the face of Creedence Clearwater Revival. And don't worry, I have friends in high places, basically, and I can get you a record deal. Wonder what happened there. So anyhow, so the Fogertys, John and Tom, grew up Irish Roman Catholic. They went to Catholic schools all the way up until high school, until the early 1960s, when they went to El Cerrito High in El Cerrito, Cal. I'm sure you know what that is.
Yep. Used to play football. Yep.
Oh, okay. So, as a matter of fact, one of my teachers in high school was classmates with three of the members of CCR. So, completely tangential. But anyhow, so Saul Zantz said, I'll basically make you a star. I'll get you these recording contracts. So I'm not sure, it's about a debate as to how they came up with the name Creedence Clearwater Revival. But they changed the name in 1967. And the following year, they basically were on top of the musical universe. So from 1968 to 1970, they produced 7 albums. They never actually had interestingly enough, they never had a number one hit in the US. They had 5 number 2s, but they topped the charts in other places like Canada and all throughout Europe and places like that. But so why am I telling you this? So there's the original lead singer and frontman of Creedence Clearwater Revival was Tom Fogerty. So I guess according to Tom's own admission, he had a religious experience. Now, I'm not sure if it was legitimate, but he said, you know what, I can't do this anymore. He said he became, born again, a Bible-believing Christian, and he never opened up. He said, I never opened up a Bible. I was Catholic, and so he started reading a Bible, and he said, I can't do this anymore. I can't perform with Creedence Clearwater Revival. I can't do the so-called Christian music because, in his opinion, it's just as wicked.
He's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
So he basically walked away from Creedence Clearwater Revival, and he was making a huge amount of money at the time. And so Zantz said,
like he was a saved man. Sounds like he was generally saved by the grace of God. Amen.
Okay, so Zantz said, no, Tom, you can't do that. We own you. You signed this contract. And I said, okay, sue me for breach of contract. And he did. It ended up ruining him financially. He said, I don't care. I had to be able to live with myself.
Good.
He ended up living the rest of his life, I guess, in Arizona, like Tucson, with his wife, and he got a job, doing odd things. So he'd gone from, running around in limos to basically being able to barely afford a beat up pickup truck.
What an honorable thing he did. Good for him.
So
he'll have his reward for that.
So anyhow, he during the late 1980s, I guess he got sick, and I guess he developed tuberculosis or something like that. It was like 1988, 1989, and the doctor came back and said, "Oh, sorry, Tom, you have AIDS." "Oh, really? I've heard about that." They said, "Well, we have this treatment we like to give you."
Oh no!
So he died.
So the bastards killed him with their AZT. Is that what happened?
Yes.
That's what happens when you trust the medical profession. They'll get you every time. Awful.
Well, so anyhow, so that was like the little shaggy dog. So stories like that are rare. You have people who make professions of faith and say, oh, yeah, but I'm a Christian. I've accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior and all that sort of stuff. I want to do the bling. I want to make these horror movies where I murder people. Well, I don't actually murder people. My character murders people, or I don't actually commit fornication. My character does.
Yeah, there you go. That's it. Everybody watching it, they want to do the same thing. Monkey see, monkey do. The Jesuits know that's the power of the TV. Hey, George, we got to go.
Okay. So
for an hour and a half, young man. So why don't you finish up and give your contact info?
Okay, so you mind if I finish with one last point?
I'll give you a dispensation once again, my son.
Okay, so over the weekend, on Saturday, I went to my local library because I had to take care of some business there. And I was talking to a library. This is close to closing time, and I was talking to a librarian there who was wearing a mask. And I've interacted with her before, and I said, "Hey, were you working with the library back in 2020?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, so I understand that you were closed down for a few months." And she said, "Yes, we were." So, would you mind telling me what the reopening procedure was? And she said, "Well, first, as you said, we're closed for a few months, and then for a few months, we were doing curbside, but then after about 6 months or so, we did allow indoor services, but they're requiring masks, and they held that was on. They're doing that for well over a year, maybe a year and a half." And she said, "So, do you actually have a question? Is there something I can look up for you?" And I said, "Yes. I was wondering, do you know if SARS-CoV-2 has ever been purified and isolated?" He said, "What?" So, do you know if this thing they're calling SARS-CoV-2 has ever?
Are you trying to think for yourself now?
And so she went on to, I guess, the CDC's website, and she said, "Yes, it's been isolated and purified." That was back in 2019, hence the name SARS-CoV-2.
Who said so? Fauci?
Well, or whoever. And I said, "Oh," she said, "Yes, it's been isolated and purified. It's been proven to exist." And I said, "Well, says who?" And then she got a little bit hot on the collar, and she said, "Well, people with a brain." And she said,
"Got to bring that feminism out now. Got to bring the feminism out and put down the man, because I'm better than you and I'm above you, stupid man." So go ahead.
And she's a white woman.
You're always the worst.
Okay, so so then she said, "Listen, it's almost closing time, and I have things to do. And by the way, these questions as if that you believe in conspiracy theories." And that was a complete, sucker punch because we weren't. I was simply asking her some questions, and so
they're so stupid to blow you off by just branding you a quote unquote conspiracy theorist that came out, I think, in like 1965 or something like that. It wasn't 1947, it was later on. CIA. So we'll brainwash all these people not to ever consider that there might be a conspiracy, because really, that's all there is. That's out of Rome, but go ahead.
Okay, so she says, "Well, I'm sorry, I don't have time to engage in this nonsense." So as I said, I did not make any declarative statements. I didn't say, this is not real or never was real. I was just simply asking some questions. And so,
George,
so I guess if you engage further.
George, you were questioning the Holy Father. When the Holy Father says AIDS is real, you denied that. Why, then you called the Holy Father a liar, George. Shame on you.
Well, so the ball's in the air. It's just been snapped, and I realized, the whistle's been blown. So I just want to end with this little factoid. Last week, I guess you did a presentation on Jonathan Pollard, and I'm not going to relitigate that. But did you know that his father, Morris Pollard, was a biology professor at Notre Dame?
I didn't know that, but it shows you that they were connected. That Pollard became in the, he was with DIA, I believe, several, the FBI, DIA, NSA. He He was highly connected. In one of them. And then all of a sudden, he decided to tell the truth and give military information to the government of Israel that the U.S. was supposed to give it to them anyway. So, the rest is Jesuit history. And Jesuit was designing to get him into prison for 30 years.
Okay, so on that note, I should probably give you my contact information.
Yes, please.
Okay, so if people have any questions, comments, concerns, critiques, please email me at georgewidger 1969@gmail.com. That's GEORWIDGER1969@gmail.com. Please let me know where you're emailing me from. If there's a topic you'd like me to go over or go over again, please let me know. Also, if you just simply want to say hi, please just drop me a line.
Amen. Well, Brother George, thanks for being with us today. Always appreciate you. You entertain the most lively topics, which elicits responses from me every now and then. But George, thanks for being with us, and thank you for tuning in today, dear listener. 24/7 World Radio, it's this podcast, and pray that I can get my radio station going once again. And in the meantime, appreciate your prayers, 2 minutes a day, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting for me and George, and Stephen and others, and Brother Vlad and Brother Eric. If you want to contact me, you can contact me at rbpbchurch@comcast.net. Appreciate your gifts. You can send a check to rbpbdonate@comcast.net, or you can send a gift by PayPal. That's PayPal, rbpbdonate@comcast.net. Or you can send it to my address, a check to the address at P.O. Box 306, Newmanstown, Pennsylvania, 17073. That's RBT. And then you can also send something to Cash App, which is Eric John Phelps. And that's the name there, capital E, capital J, capital P. So appreciate your gifts and appreciate your prayers. And that the Lord would also bring more students, that I can have my tax class, basic private citizenship class, and I've perfected my advanced class. I worked on it for almost 5 days now, and it's much better, and wonderful things to be taught in it. So appreciate your prayers there, especially in this timely time when you can learn about the real powers of the Jesuits running the government since they took it over on March 9th, 1933. So appreciate your support, appreciate your gifts, appreciate your prayers, and appreciate your prayers for Brother George. So until we meet again, may the Lord bless. Maranatha.